In honor of it being National Pollinator Week, which runs from June 16th to the 22nd, I'll be going over Ornithophily, which is the pollination of flowers by birds. So, first, what exactly is pollination? Pollination is the process of transferring pollen from one flower to another. This is primarily how plants reproduce and spread. Worldwide, only about 10 to 15% of plants can self pollinate, leaving about 85 to 90% needing another means to reproduce. That could come in the form of wind or water, but most often it's another living creature. While when we think of pollinators, we typically think of the main ones, the insects, moths, butterflies, beetles, or even bats. But birds can also fill this important role in the ecosystem. Just as a bee will pick up pollen as it goes from flower to flower, so will birds. On a flower, pollen from its anthers, which is the part of the flower that produces and stores the pollen, will stick to a bird's body as it feeds. The anther is usually located on the upper side of a flower, evolutionary located there to dust the pollinators, in this case the bird's head or back, with its pollen. As they move from flower to flower, this pollen then gets transferred to a flower's stigma, which is the part of the flower that allows the flower to get fertilized. As you would guess, pollination is a crucial process. Without it, plants would not spread. This process is crucial not only for the environment, but also us. All the fruits, vegetables, and nuts we eat all require pollination, and without this process, we would lose about 75% of our crops. Pollinators help maintain ecological balance, as well as the plant life and its diversity. This process not only benefits the animal life that gets nourishment from the nectar, but the plant gets to reproduce and receive a greater genetic diversity through this transfer of pollen. While there are several species or groups of species that primarily fill the role as pollinators, it is estimated that about 2,000 different bird species in 74 different families will visit flowers and can fill this critical environmental service. Species can range from woodpeckers, warblers, flycatchers, pigeons, hummingbirds, orioles, and parrots. While insects may make up the bulk of pollinators, visiting many more flowers than birds do, birds pollinating flowers do have another advantage that insects don't. Because of a bird's size and ability to cover a greater range, they can spread genetic diversity between flowers to a much greater degree and range than most insects would be able to. All pollinator groups, whether that be insects, birds, mammals, or even reptiles, will fill their own unique ecosystem role as a pollinator. There are also many other benefits for flowers to be pollinated by birds. Areas that are cold, very dry, or maybe just an area that has many days that insects might not be able to be active, flowers still need to be pollinated. Deserts can be too dry for many insects, or places that are colder, like the tops of mountains, like seen in the Andes Mountains, where there's actually a huge variety of hummingbirds that do serve as primary pollinators, or places that have temperatures that is too cold for insects to fly for many parts of the year, maybe missing out on pollination if insects aren't able to be active and provide this service. Birds, though, don't typically have that issue to that extent. Birds are more resilient, able to handle a wider range of environmental conditions, and thus are more of a reliable pollinator than insects are. Flowers also tend to have different characteristics depending on what group of pollinators they target. The flowers that typically are catered to attract birds tend to be tubular or cupped in a way that the petals curve out of the way, allowing for birds to access the nectar. This tube shape that these flowers have evolved to make use of this method of pollination, making it harder for them to be accessed by insects, but easier for the birds that want to feed on them. Since nectar in flowers is found at the base of the flower, it then forces the bird to reach for it, often having the anther, which is the part of the flower that produces and stores the pollen, to rub on the bird's head, beak, or belly as it feeds. To see examples of flowers that have evolved to be primarily bird pollinated, look at species such as the coral honeysuckle, trumpet vine, lobelias, the agave, or the bottle brushes of Australia. Birds have excellent sight, but typically aren't known for their good sense of smell. So, flowers that use birds as their primary pollinator tend to be brightly colored, such as with reds, yellows, and orange, all the while tending to be odorless, as this feature won't really be much help when they want to attract birds. Flowers that want to attract insects, though, tend to be blue or purple. Studies have shown that it is also a learned characteristic of associating the red with a food source. That's why you'll often see hummingbird feeders being primarily red, or with red dyed sugar water. But as a note, please do not use red dye in your hummingbird food or purchase any that have this red dye. It has been found to not be beneficial at all and can actually pose several health risks to hummingbirds. Since most birds that can act as pollinators are active during the day, flowers that want to use birds also tend to bloom during the day or primarily produce their nectar during this time. Places that have flowers where bats will be their main pollinator have flowers that bloom at night. The whole reason flowers evolved into existence in the first place was to attract pollinators. Same goes for nectar. It requires quite the amount of energy to produce, but it serves an important purpose. Birds aren't attracted to flowers for the purpose of pollinating them. They are attracted to the flowers to drink their nectar as a food source. So many of these plants have evolved to have ample amount of nectar to attract these birds, while not having too much, which encourages the bird to have to visit many flowers to get enough nourishment, which, as a result, increases the pollination as a result. Many flowers have even evolved with certain shapes to get the most pollen transferred to the visiting bird. Birds who act as pollinators have typically evolved a unique bill shape to be able to reach the nectar in flowers, usually by being long, slightly down-curved, and thin. For many flowers, there may not be a good place to perch within reaching distance of it. This trait has also led to a notable characteristic that many are familiar with in hummingbirds, the ability to hover in place and fly backwards. And hummingbirds are probably going to be one of the first bird species you think of when someone mentions birds as pollinators. After all, they are nectarivores, whose primary diet consists of the nectar from flowers. Hummingbirds have even been documented as visiting up to 2,000 individual flowers in one day. This relationship between flowers and their pollinators can be really seen when you look at some flower shapes and the hummingbird species that it frequents it. Specialization has evolved to fit perfectly to each other, with only certain hummingbird species and their unique bill shape able to reach the nectar of certain flowers. Good examples of this can be seen when you look at species such as the sword-billed hummingbird, whose 4-inch beak works perfectly for getting to the nectar of the passion flowers of South America. Or compare the beak on the white-tipped sicklebill, which is extremely decurved, to its favorite flower, Centropogon granulosus. This coevolution allows only those specific hummingbirds to be able to reach the nectar, all the while positioning the hummingbird to get the most pollen transferred. This connection proves to be beneficial for both the hummingbird and the plant. Studies have proven that when hummingbirds with a beak length or shape that best matches a particular flower visits said flower, the hummingbird will get a much greater nectar intake than if it was a species whose beak didn't match the flower. And at the same time, when the beak matches the flower, there is also an increased amount of pollen that is successfully transferred to the bird and then back to the next flower. While hummingbirds play one of the biggest roles in pollination bird-wise, they are a group that is only found in the Americas. Many species have been documented as pollinators across the world. Whether nectar is a major part of their diet, or they only occasionally use this as a food source. Other species in other continents have evolved to fill this same niche, though, such as the sunbirds in Africa, the honey eaters or brush-tongued parrots of Australia, and many, many more. In Hawaii, the EEV is a small, bright red songbird whose bill is strongly decurved, hinting at its main diet, nectar. While foraging for this food source, they end up playing a very important role in the pollination of many native Hawaiian plants. In the Sonoran Desert, the white-winged dove plays as a pollinator for the saguaro cactus. These desert-dwelling doves actually synchronize their migration with the flowering of the cactus, who then pollinate the flowers as they sip the nectar. That is not the only beneficial role they play with the saguaros. Once these cactus flowers come to seed, the dove also is the main means of dispersal of the seed as they eat them and then disperse them throughout their ways across the desert. The Gila woodpecker, another desert inhabitant, can also pollinate the saguaro cactus as it visits its flowers. Another group of birds who serve as pollinators that many in North America are familiar with is the orioles. These birds tend to prefer to visit flowering trees, where they will cross-pollinate their flowers. Due to their shorter beaks, they also tend to get a bit more messy than species like hummingbirds who have the long, thin bills. Pollen tends to get more on them, leading to more potential for pollination for each flower. There are even some species that's primary diet consisting of nectar who don't access it in the typical way. These birds are the flower piercers of Central and South America, often referred to as parasites of the pollination process. And as you can probably guess from the name, to get the nectar, instead of going through the open flower, they pierce the base. While these birds specialize in nectar robbing, studies have shown that they will manage to get quite the amount of pollen on them anyways, sometimes even more so than hummingbirds. Many consider this group of species an interesting example of both mutualistic and antagonistic animal-plant relations. You will notice, though, that in most of these cases of birds being used as pollinators, that they occur in tropical areas. That will make sense when you think about how these areas, climate-wise, can afford to have plants that flower year-round. This gives this connection and coevolution time to evolve, though in the Americas, our hummingbird species get around this by migrating to stay in areas where food will always be available. So, now that you know the roles and importance of birds as pollinators, how can we help protect our native pollinators? Luckily, there are many things we can do in our own yard to help these important members of the ecosystem. A good start is to make sure your home and yard are safe for birds. A typical yard can pose many threats to birds, but luckily, most are easy fixes. Window collisions are a huge threat to birds. Making sure you properly mitigate windows to make them more visible to birds to avoid collisions is super important. Eliminate the use of pesticides and insecticides. These toxins don't just stop on the plant or insect. They move up the food chain and infect other songbirds. Cats also pose a huge threat to birds, and it is estimated they can kill up to 4 billion a year. Keeping them indoors not only keeps the birds safer, but it also keeps the cats safer as well. Once your home and yard are bird safe, then you can work on inviting and encouraging them to come to your yard through planting native plants. Planting different native flowering plants that flower at different times of the year will allow you to have a nectar food source for hummingbirds and other pollinated birds throughout most of the year. If you're interested in finding out what native plants to plant in your area, check out this cool tool by the National Audubon Society, and you can find it at www.audubon.org/native-plants. And if you want to artificially provide food for nectarivores, remember to only use regular table sugar in a ratio of 1 part sugar to 4 parts water, and regularly clean and change that solution. Birds fill so many different roles in the ecosystem. Protecting them can start in your own backyard. I hope this insight into bird roles as pollinators inspires you to learn more about the world of birds. Thank you for listening, all you lovely bird nerds, and have a great day.